but many of us were. My wonderful wife Carol is in Chicago visiting my daughter Katie today, and Amy is away, but I'm here, and so are you. And so it is incredibly good to have you here. You know, that song is really, really true. Do you realize that? You do recognize that sometimes you just sing words and don't think about them, right? You just sort of do that. At least, okay, let me take that back. I do that. I don't know if you do that, but I do that. I want you to catch the significance of that song. That God's love is never going to end. It's never failing. And here's the principle that you and I need to walk away with today. That we're all on a spiritual journey. All of us, we're on a spiritual journey. And that journey sometimes is messy, but God never gives up on you. It's okay to be messy. It's just not okay to stay there. And today is your day, because what we're going to talk about today is incredibly important. And I told the team that helped us set up that I could probably give you 16 things to do based on today's talk. I'm going to give you one thing, just one thing to do. But I guarantee you this, if you do that one thing, just one thing, if you do the one thing, it will radically impact your life. Radically impact your life. You're here on a really important, good day. Well, when you came in this morning, inside the program, you were given a connection card that looks like this sometime during our gathering today. If you could take a moment and fill that out, we would greatly appreciate it. And there's a Today section on there. If God says something to you today, or you have a prayer request, or you got a question, that's a place to jot that thing down. We'll collect those at the end of our time today. I want to pray for you that you would clearly hear from God today. All right, pray with me. Would you, Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you that your love never ends. God, there are so many times when we make poor choices. And while that breaks your heart, it doesn't stop you from loving us, and for that we're grateful. Father, as we tackle some truth from the Scriptures today about who we really are at the core, I pray that you would speak to each of us. I pray that you would give us hope. Hope for today, hope for tomorrow. Hope that you can continue to transform us, to change us, so we would be pleasing to you. God, it's our desire to surrender our lives to you, to seek you, to follow after you. And I pray that based upon who you are, we'd be enamored with you. We'd want to passionately pursue you and see you do amazing things in our lives and through our lives. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand together and sing one more song. Well, in the 1990s, I want to take you back. Some of you've never been there, so hang on for the ride. I want to take you back to the 1990s. In the 1990s, something happened. There were these wristbands. They were actually called bracelets that people began to wear. WWJD, what would Jesus do? And it was something that literally swept across the country. You'd see athletes wearing them. You'd see people wearing them. What would Jesus do? Now, perhaps you wore one, maybe you didn't. I always thought, you know what, if you call it a wristband, a lot more guys will wear it than if you call it a bracelet. Seemed to me like if it's a bracelet, not going to wear that thing. But if it's a wristband, that seemed to be okay. I want to give you the backstory of the WWJD wristbands. 1897, there's a man named Charles Shelton who wrote a book. He wrote a book called In His Steps, What Would Jesus Do? And it was a book about a small town and the people that would be faced with decisions in this novel, and they would simply ask themselves the question, what would Jesus do? 1897. That book, over the last 100+ years, has sold 30 million copies. 30 million copies. That's a lot of book sales, is it not? The whole idea was, hey, if you live your life the way Jesus wants you to live your life, if you ask the question, what would he do if he were in my shoes? You'd probably be making some really good decisions. Now, we're going to start a series that is a takeoff on what would Jesus do. But I want to structure the question a little bit different than that. I want to ask the question, what would Jesus undo in your life? What would he undo in your life? What's in your life that he says, you know what, that's not good. We need to work on that. You'll notice that the title of the series is the issue of getting rid of the knots in your life. He wants to undo the knots in your life. There are certain things that as he looks at you, as he looks at me, he says, you know what, we got to do something about that. Now, I don't know about you, but I was a Boy Scout. How many of you were Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts? Let me see your hands. Be proud about that. Yeah. I did not have to take a class or earn the badge to learn how to do knots. It just came natural to me. It seems like everything I have eventually becomes knotted up. If it's a hose and I haven't gotten it out for a while, I pull it out, and there are like 43 different knots in a 50-foot hose. If I have an extension cord, somehow or another, the brilliant person that put it away, namely me, somehow wasn't really paying attention, and you pull the thing out, and you're going, oh, forget it. I just need to go buy a new cord. It's going to take me like 3 weeks of Fridays to figure this thing out. There are knots in my life that annoy me. But I also want to tell you today that there are knots in your life today. That despite the fact that Jesus really does love you no matter what you do, there are knots in your life that really do annoy him. In this series, we're going to talk about 5 different knots that are in your life and mine that, quite frankly, Jesus wants to undo. Now, I don't know about you, but I am a gift giver. If I love you, I'm eventually going to give you something. I'm going to go buy something. I probably shouldn't use the word go there. I'm going to actually sit down at the table, get my computer out, and I'm going to go onto Amazon, or I'm going to go onto a website, and I'm going to buy something so that I can give it to you. I love to give people gifts. When you give them something, what I'm really looking for, so if I ever give you a gift, this is what I'm looking for. What I'm really looking for is I want your eyes to light up and go, wow! That is amazing. That is great. And you're going, Ed, it's a tie. Okay, no, I'm going to give you something better than a tie. But you're looking for something. When you give something to someone, you're looking for that light to shine in their eyes. Are you not? Yeah. You ever been to a little kid's birthday party? Little kid's birthday party, and there are 23 other little kids there, and they've all brought gifts. And they pile them up around the kid, and what happens? The kid starts ripping the paper off, looks at it, goes, okay, chucks it over here, looks at the next thing, chucks it over here, looks at the next thing, chucks it over here. And I'm thinking, dude, I spent $15 on that. You should at least smile and pretend like you really care that I gave you that gift. You see, when I give somebody something and they don't respond right, I'm thinking, what's with that? Have you ever been there? What's with that? You know, it's been said that perhaps Jesus feels the same way. Because think about what he's done for you. Left heaven, came to earth, lived 30 years, went to the cross, suffered, rose from the dead for you, and then was involved in changing your life. But honestly, if you're like me, perhaps there are days that go by that you really don't think about how good it is that you have a relationship with him. And you don't thank him for the good things that he is doing. It's sort of like, meh. You know, we really do live in a meh kind of generation, don't we? You know, you go, hey, you know, what's your purpose in life? Meh. Hey, how you doing spiritually? Meh. It sounds sort of like a cow, doesn't it? You just go, you know, whatever. Meh, meh. We live in a meh kind of society, a meh kind of culture. Today, I want to talk about indifference with you. It's actually Roman number 1 in your notes. Here it is. Jesus wants to undo spiritual indifference. He wants to undo spiritual indifference. And you say, okay, what is spiritual indifference? I've given you a real simple definition there. You're not going to find this in Webster's, but here it is. It's the first bullet point, having a meh attitude about following Jesus. Having a meh attitude about following Jesus. It is so easy for us, as followers of Jesus, to just begin to coast. How you doing? How's your spiritual life? It's about a 4 on a 1 to 10. How you spending time in the Word? I don't know. You going to church on the regular? It's just not all that important. Somehow we've developed this sense of indifference to who God is and what He's done in our lives. I don't know if you realize this or not, but Jesus wrote 7 letters. He wrote 7 letters to 7 different churches. They're found in Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3. So if you're looking for something to read, you got to read Revelation chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 3. There are 7 churches, all in Asia Minor, that he writes to, and he addresses issues in each of the churches. There's a church called Laodicea. They're in the town of Laodicea. And quite frankly, it is the town filled with Christ followers that have a kind of indifferent attitude toward following Jesus. Here's what you need to know about the town of Laodicea. 35 years prior to when Jesus wrote that small letter to the church of Laodicea, there was an earthquake. Obliterated the town. The town was incredibly wealthy, though. The people were opulent in their lifestyle. They had plenty of money. And so, without even going to the Roman government, they themselves rebuild the town. It is an amazing town. It is the Dubai or the Las Vegas of its day. It is an amazing city. There's only one problem this town has. It has an inadequate water supply. But they figured out how to get water to the town. It just so happens that the town of Colossae, which is where the book of Colossians was written to, the town of Colossae is fairly nearby, and they build an aqueduct from Colossae all the way to Laodicea. And the cool thing about Colossae, there are cool, refreshing springs there. And so they have that cool, refreshing water coming in an aqueduct all the way into the town of Laodicea. There's also, on the opposite side, there's another city. It's called Hierapolis. In the city of Hierapolis, they didn't have cool, refreshing springs. What they had there were hot springs. And so they built an aqueduct that would bring that hot water all the way from Hierapolis into the town of Laodicea. It's a pretty amazing thing. Cool, refreshing water from one side, warm, hot water from the other. What's not to like about that? The problem was, along the way, as the water came from Colossae and Hierapolis, the cool, refreshing water grew lukewarm. The hot spring water grew lukewarm. And with that in mind, Jesus addresses an important issue in them. It's found in Revelation chapter 3. Look at it with me. Revelation chapter 3. It's on page 863. If you have a copy of the scriptures like we give out in the back, absolutely for free, as our gift to you. Revelation chapter 3 and verse 15. Jesus is writing this to the church of Laodicea. Keep in mind, they bring in cool, refreshing water. They bring in hot, warm water. Both of them have become lukewarm and sort of like, Jesus is going to address that with them. Notice what he says. Verse 15, he says, I know your deeds. In other words, he's saying, look, I know everything about you. I know what you did yesterday. I know what you did this week. I know what you've done this last month. I actually know what you've been doing over the last year. I know everything about you. I know your deeds. That you are neither, catch this now, you are neither cold nor hot. As soon as they read that, they are picturing the water that comes from Colossae, the cool, refreshing water that by the time it gets there is lukewarm, and the warm, hot water that's coming from Hierapolis, and they go, oh, I sort of get it. It's lukewarm, nothing kind of water. I am a tea lover. Good old hot tea, really good. Iced tea, really good. Tea in the middle, really bad. You just don't want to drink lukewarm tea. Same principle. You see, lukewarm water was doing no good to anyone, and Jesus says, look, you are neither hot nor cold. And then he says something really interesting. He says, I wish that you were either one or the other. Pretty interesting thing. He said, you could see if you go, I really wish you were hot. That would make sense, right? In the spiritual arena, he's saying, I want you to be enamored with me. I want you to be on fire with me. I want you to be hot. But he says, I wish that you were one or the other. In other words, he's saying, look, decide if you're in or you're out. Don't stay in the middle. Get in or get out. Don't stay in the middle. Then he says this in verse 16, so because you are lukewarm, you're neither cold nor hot, because you're lukewarm, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. Jesus is saying, look, you are spiritually stale, he says to the church of Laodicea. He says, you're depressingly detached from me. You don't even seem to care. There is a tremendous sense of spiritual indifference. Then he says, it doesn't just break my heart, it turns my stomach. It doesn't just break my heart, it turns my stomach. He says, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. In the original Greek, what that phrase spit out really means is I'm going to vomit you out. In other words, your actions, I still love you, but your actions actually sicken me. He's saying, look, you can't just have a spiritual life that's like, meh. He says, get in, get out. Let me ask you a question. Just imagine you didn't hear any of that little introduction to the talk today, okay? If I were to ask you as you came in, where would you put yourself on a 1 to 10 level of spiritual passion? You know where most of us would put ourselves? Somewhere in the middle. 4, 5, 6. You know what Jesus says? He says, that's lukewarm. He says, that causes me to be nauseous. It causes me to want to vomit. So why do we get to that point? Look at your notes. It says there are primarily two causes of spiritual indifference. Two causes of spiritual indifference. The first one is this: the illusion of self-sufficiency. The illusion of self-sufficiency. It's the idea of saying, you know what, I'm okay. I am okay. My life is fine. Everything is going well. Look back at that passage in Revelation chapter 3. Look at verse 17. He says, you say that I am rich. I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing. But you do not realize. That word realize is a very interesting word. He says, you say that I'm rich, I've acquired wealth, I don't need a thing, but you do not realize. The word realize there has the idea of you don't have a full understanding of who you really are. You are not fathoming the truth. Now he's going to say, you're not rich, you're not wealthy. Oh, you might be materially rich. You might be wealthy with material stuff, but you're missing the point. He says, it goes beyond that. You do not understand, you do not realize that you are, catch these 5 things that he says about them. He says that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. Now, if you want to impress somebody, go to work tomorrow and say, you know, I was thinking about you this weekend. And when I think about you being wretched, pitiful, poor, blind. Now, don't tell them you're thinking about them being naked, because that'd be a little weird. But here's the principle. Those are not good things that he's saying about them. He's saying you are not cutting the mustard. There is something really wrong. That idea, the word wretched, is you are a fraud. You are vile. You are the exact opposite of what I really want you to be. You pretend that you really are enamored with me, but you're really not. The word miserable is the idea you are incredibly pitiful. You're missing God's best intent. The word poor there doesn't just have the idea of somebody who's just getting by. You're bringing absolutely nothing to the table. You are like a beggar. You have no spiritual interest. He says, and you are blind. You can't see spiritual truth. You're blind. You might know it, but you don't apply it. Then he says, you are naked. The idea is that you are not living a righteous life at all. He says, I'll offer you righteousness because you can't build it on your own. But they had even decided, you know what? We are not going to buy into it. In other words, they got so sidetracked. So sidetracked. They get sidetracked with terrible, horrible things. I got sidetracked with busyness. If there's one thing that sidetracks us, that sidetracks me, it's busyness. You see, it's easy to think, you know what, I'm good. Have you said that? I'm good. I'm good. I got my iPhone. I got my Mac computer, just got it updated. It's really good. I'm really good to go there. I got Netflix. I got my Snuggie. I mean, what more could I want? Everything is fine. I am fine. You might have tons of things and still not find any kind of real fulfillment in life. It is so easy to be drawn to temporary satisfiers. That's a great statement, by the way. You ought to write it down. It is so easy to be drawn to temporary satisfiers. The things that cry out and say, you know what, you just need this and you're going to be so fine. They were spiritually bankrupt. They fell into the illusion of self-sufficiency. But he says to them, but I have good news for you. I can change your life. But you got to decide on your own. You just don't have what it takes. You know, earlier I mentioned that we're all on a spiritual journey. It's okay to be messy. Did you catch the last phrase? We're all on a spiritual journey. It's okay to be messy. It's just not okay to stay there. We're all on a spiritual journey. It's okay to be messy. It's just not okay to stay there. Honestly, some of us are there, we're messed up, and we don't even realize it. We think we're okay. We think we're self-sufficient. Everything is fine. That's reason number one as to spiritual indifference in your life. Here's the second reason spiritual indifference will come into your life. I face this all the time. I think you do too. Here it is. Distractions of this world. Distractions of this world. It's an author and pastor named John Ortberg who wrote an article, and the article is entitled Taking Care of Busyness. Taking Care of Busyness. I'm going to read you a quote. Here's what he said. For most of us, the great danger is not that we'll renounce our faith. I'd say that's true for us. It is that we will become so distracted and rushed and preoccupied that we will settle for a mediocre version of our faith. We'll just skim our lives instead of actually living them. We'll just skim through it. Jesus tells an interesting story. He called it a parable that I want to share with you this morning. It's found in Mark chapter 4. If you'd look at Mark chapter 4, it's on page 701. Mark chapter 4 and page 701. If you and I had been living in Israel during Jesus' time upon the earth, it would have been common that we had seen farmers out sowing seed. Now, they didn't have tractors like you and I would see in fields today. Basically, if you were going to sow seed, you had a bag that had seed in it. It was probably had a strap around your neck, and you would go out and you'd chuck seed in the field. And Jesus is going to help them see that picture, and he's going to apply the whole issue of being distracted and not applying spiritual principles to your life. Here's what he says. Mark chapter 4, verse 2, it says this. He taught them many things in parables. He said this one day, verse 3. Listen, he says, a farmer went out to sow a seed. So he's chucking seed. And as he was scattering seed, some fell along the path. And you say, well, why is he chucking seed where there's a path? Well, he'd be walking down between the aisles, and he'd chuck seed this way, chuck seed that way, and there'd be a path here that he would be walking on. He says, some fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. In other words, that seed's not going to grow. Verse 5. Some fell on the rocky places, like my yard, for instance. Some fell on the rocky places where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but because the soil was shallow, verse 6, when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and withered because they had no root. Like my yard 2 weeks ago during the heat. My grass went from green to a nice crunchy brown. He says this, verse 7. Others fell among the thorns and grew up and choked the plants so that they did not bear grain. But still others, verse 8, fell in the good soil. It grew, produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some multiplying 60, some multiplying 100 times. Then he says this. Verse 9, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. In other words, I just gave you something that was incredibly important. But the listeners that day were apparently a little bit slow on the uptake. And it says this, verse 10, when he was alone, the 12 disciples and the others around him asked him about the parables. They're going, hey, you know the whole farming thing you just shared back there? Whoop, didn't get it, have no idea what you were really talking about. And so he explains it to them. He explains that the seed that was sown and it really began to blossom and it grew and it multiplied. He's saying that's like the principles that I'm going to give you to live. If you live by them, there'll be fruit in your life. Then he says in verse 18, check it out, it's an important verse. Verse 18 and 19, here's what he says. Still other seed was sown among the thorns. It's like those who hear the word. Notice that, they hear the word, but the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, the desires for other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. They heard it. They knew it. They didn't apply it. They didn't live it. What's he saying? He's saying the everyday challenges of life sometimes bombard us and they sidetrack us spiritually. Life just happens, doesn't it? Things go wrong. And those things that go wrong, they take your time. The kid gets sick and you can't go, you know, I'm just going to let him go over there and puke in a corner. No, you got to take care of that. Your car breaks down. There's a need, there's a bill to pay, there's dishes to do. And it goes on and 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 on. And it's as if we're saying, you know what, I got just enough of Jesus to help me get through this thing. I got just enough of Jesus. Just enough Jesus so that I don't feel bad about eternity. I don't know if I'm going to die, I'm going to go to heaven. Just enough of Jesus to have a sense of comfort and security when things go bad. Just enough of Jesus to feel better about ourselves. And Jesus says, you know what I would do? You make me want to vomit. That's what he says. And it's really incredibly sad, isn't it? There are 6 expressions I want to give you rather quickly because you say, okay, so what does that look like? If I'm indifferent to my spiritual life and indifferent to passionately following Jesus, what does that look like? So I want to give you 6 expressions before I give you the one thing that I really want to challenge you to do. When I give you these 6 expressions, I want to challenge you to be thinking through, is that me? Is that me? Maybe even on a 1 to 10, score yourself out. 1 being incredibly low, 10 being incredibly high. My guess is that for most of us, we're going to land somewhere in the middle. You know what that means? We're lukewarm. And Jesus says, you know, I love you, but that sickens me. Let me give you the 6 expressions. Here they are. First one is this. It's in Roman number 2, expressions of living with a lukewarm spiritual indifference. Expressions of living with a lukewarm spiritual indifference. Number 1, you're more concerned with impressing people than living for God. You're more concerned with impressing people than living for God. You're enamored with what people think about you. You want to look good rather than be good. Look good rather than be good. The Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 3 said this. He says, mark this, the terrible times are going to come in the last days. And then he says this, that people will be lovers of themselves. Lovers of themselves. In other words, they'll think about themselves before they think about anybody else. They think about themselves before they think about who God is and what he's done in their lives. Here's the second expression. You're obsessed with life on earth rather than eternity. Obsessed with life on earth rather than eternity. You're enamored with the here and now. It's so easy to be enamored with the here and the now. John, who wrote the Gospel of John, and then he wrote 1 John, said this. Do not love the world or anything in the world. I got to tell you, it is so easy to love stuff in the world, isn't it? It's so easy to be enamored with stuff. Let me ask you, you enamored with stuff? Let me give you the third expression. Here it is. You rationalize sin. You rationalize sin. We just talked about this last week when we talked about Samson. He rationalized sin. He, in other words, said, you know what, I'm okay. What could go wrong? He got to the point where he began to just think, you know what, that's fine. Have you noticed in our culture that we've changed some words around? We no longer talk about adultery. We talk about having an affair. I drive through Harrisburg on a fair amount, and there's a large billboard there that's advertising a gentleman's club. And I'm thinking, people that go there probably are anything but gentlemen. Does that make sense? But you see, we've softened everything up. Now, I don't know what your issue is that could sidetrack you. But I just know this, for me, it's easy to think, you know, there's just that one thing. There's just those couple of things in my life. And really, I'm sure God understands that. He knows that I'm struggling. And he's going, yeah, I do. And I want to change that in your life. It's so easy for us to rationalize our sin away. The fourth expression is this. You believe in Jesus, but you rarely tell others about him. You believe in Jesus, but you rarely tell others about him. You know why that's true? Some would say, well, I don't know how. Or some would say, you know, there's just fear. I don't know if they'd be accepted or rejected. I don't think those are the answers. You know what the real answer is? We're not really enamored with him. Because if we were really enamored with him, we wouldn't be able to shut up about who he is. You see, it would just sort of come out. You think, you know what, I found something incredibly good, and you need to understand what it is. Now, I can't make you take Jesus, but I got to tell you, like he's changing my life. If you and I aren't looking for opportunities to tell others about who he is, there's probably a decent amount of indifference in our spiritual walks today. Here's the fifth one. You only turn to God when you need him. You only turn to God when you need him. You're having a bad day and you cry out to God and you're going, hey, God, really need you over here. You turn to God when something goes wrong. It's sort of like this toolbox that I brought along today. Now, this toolbox typically sits in my basement. Most of the time, I don't even think about this toolbox, but when something goes wrong, I'm going, hey, yeah, you need to go get your favorite tool. You know what my favorite tool is? You can pretty much fix anything with this. Seriously. You can fix a computer with this. Yeah, you tap it hard enough and you just buy a new one. This is an amazing tool. It's a hammer. It's great. But normally, I don't think about the hammer because I don't have a need for it. You know where it stays? In the toolbox. You know what you and I tend to do? We treat Jesus like he's a toolbox. Come get him when we need him. But most of the time we're thinking, well, there's not a crisis. I'll come get you later. Don't really need him. Jesus says, hey, don't treat me like a toolbox. Be enamored with me. Here's the sixth expression. You're not much different from the world. You're not much different from those that are around you. We determine right and wrong the same way others determine right and wrong. We spend our time the way others spend their time. We get distracted. I can be the chief of distractions. I know how to be distracted. About a month ago, Carol and I sat down, we looked at her car, which is parked right out here if you want to look at it afterwards. It's nice. It's a Ford Escape. It has 237,000 miles on it. It has holes in it. It's called redneck air conditioning. It puts, it's going to die. And so we had saved up our money to replace that car. We'd saved up $9,000. I don't know anything about cars. I walk on a used car parking lot, and it's like on my forehead it says, sucker. But I'm really good at researching. And so I researched. I researched and I researched and I researched, and I narrowed it down because we wanted to get some kind of SUV, and I figured out I could buy an SUV that had somewhere around 100,000 miles on it, and depending on the SUV you buy, if it has 100,000 miles on it, that's on its last leg. I already got one of those sitting out there. So I figured out exactly what we needed to do. And so after I checked it out, I began to stop at various places. And I would look at the cars, and I'd talk to the person. I actually stopped at one of the places, and the saleswoman comes over to me, and she goes, well, what kind of car are you looking for? And I'm thinking, well, that makes a lot of sense. So I told her. And she says, why don't you just sit down here? I'd like to get to know you. I'm thinking, honey, I don't want to date you. I just want to buy a car. I actually told her that, and yeah, because I'm pretty cynical, and she didn't get the sale, by the way. So after a month, I found a car, and it was amazing. I bought this car for like $8,500. It has 100,000 miles on it. 2008. BMW. Carol, you are moving up. I mean, look, you got a BMW, man. Like, wow. Now, don't tell anybody it's a 2008, but it's a BMW. Got that thing home. Everything is like automatic. And so I go to, move the rear view mirror on the outside, a little button here, boop, 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 nothing. I'm going, that's not good. So I call the guy that I bought the car from, the place that I bought it, and he's like, okay. You know how much that thing cost? $440 to fix that little beep, beep, beep. I'm going, oh, this might not have been such a good deal. Then I'm not making this up, this is true. I got a recall thing from BMW. I'm thinking that you're supposed to have really good cars. There shouldn't be recalls. They send me a letter that says, now, you should go get it serviced because if the airbag on the driver's side goes off, not only will it go off, but it can shoot metal spurs into you. I'm thinking, well, it's Carol's car. I don't have time for that. Honey, I figured out how you can get piercings. It's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. So I took it there, and an hour and a half later, they come out, and this woman comes up to me, and she's waving a paper. And I'm thinking, oh, that's going to be interesting. And she says, now, we fixed that, but there are some things wrong with your car. I'm going, there can't be. And she goes, yeah. I go, well, how much? She goes, well, it needs both rear coil springs. They're broken. That's $740. The left fog light is broken. I'm thinking, well, replace the bulb. $325. The oil gasket is messed up. $590. The valve cover gasket is messed up. $765. The oil pan gasket is seeping oil. $1,845. I'm distracted. Because now I have to go home and tell my wife, honey, I bought you a great car. And it's either going to cost us a lot of money or we're going to have oil spots in the street. We decided to have oil spots in the street. You see, it's really easy to get distracted. Like, I thought I'm going to do a really, really good thing. There was nothing bad that we did. We saved up the money. But all of a sudden, I tally the hours up. I put like 30 hours into buying a stupid car that is going to drain Carol's bank account. There are all kinds of things that come your way and come my way. And we've got to say, okay, what am I going to do? I want to give you that one thing. One thing. Not 3 things, not 12 things, one thing. I guarantee you, if you do this one thing, it will impact your life like nothing else you're going to do this year. I guarantee that to be true. Let's talk about it. It's Roman numeral number 3 in your notes. The simple step to reignite your spiritual life. The simple step to reignite your spiritual life. Now, if you came to me and said, Ed, I'm really struggling with my spiritual life, can you help me? I probably would think through, I'd probably throw some things out to you, and it would sound like this. Well, are you reading this book? Because it's a really good book to read. You should read it. Are you praying each day? Are you going to church on a regular basis? Are you fellowshipping with other Christ followers? Are you trying to share with others who need to know who Jesus really is? Are you worshiping him? Are you taking care of the sin issues in your life as they come up? I give you a whole long list. And I could have given you all of that stuff, and most of us would have been incredibly overwhelmed and gone home and done what? Nothing. So that's why I want to give you one thing. Not two things, just one thing. It's real simple, but I will tell you before I give it to you, it's not easy to do. There's a price to pay. But if you do this one thing, once a day, for 365 days, it will dramatically impact your spiritual life. Here it is. Number one, in your notes, every day do something that requires faith. Every day do something that requires faith. Every day do something that requires faith. Take a step of faith. One step each day, that's 365 steps in a year. A step of faith that in essence says, you know what, I'm going to rely upon you, God. It's in essence waking up in the morning, when you're in the shower or when you're getting dressed, you're thinking through, okay, God, here's your prayer. God, I'm going to ask that today you tell me the one thing that you want me to do that I'm going to have to rely upon you to accomplish. God, it's going to be bigger than me. It might be that you have to seek forgiveness from someone. You really don't feel like doing that, but you know it's right. It might be that you got to pour your life into somebody else. It might be that you need to give something to someone. Take a step of faith. Now let me ask you a question. Think about this. Let's be honest this morning, all right? In the last week, how many steps of faith have you taken? Count them up. All right, let's go a little broader than that. Last month, 31 days. How many steps of faith did you take? Last year, 365 days. How many steps of faith did you take? For most of us, the answer is pretty small. What if you and I began to look for those opportunities and said, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to rely upon you to do stuff that is way beyond me. Now, many of you, probably all of you, pray on a fairly regular basis. Maybe once a day, maybe twice a day. I guarantee you, you are not praying about big enough stuff. I want to challenge you to pray about something that is so big that there's no way it could happen apart from God doing it. Pray about something that is so big, there's no way it could happen unless God does it. I want to challenge you to step up to the plate and ask God to change something in your life that's been hanging on to you by the roots of your hair for the last umpteen years, and you haven't been able to get past it. Ask God to change that, and whatever he tells you to do, go ahead and do that. You see, take a step of faith. James chapter 2 and verse 17 says this, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. In other words, faith always leads to you doing something. If you and I say, you know what, I am following after Jesus, following after him, the word follow implies I'm obeying him. I'm listening to him. I'm going to give you an opportunity this morning to ponder what you've just heard. Because sometimes we come to church, don't we? And we hear stuff and we go, that was really good. And then Monday rolls around and our lives never change. Today is an opportunity for you to lock some stuff down. To say, Jesus, I don't want to be indifferent to you. I want you to be number one in my life. I want you to be first in my life. Here's the simple truth this morning. Indifference doesn't just break Jesus' heart, it makes him want to vomit. Your spiritual indifference, my spiritual indifference, doesn't just break his heart, it makes him want to vomit. But you overcome it by choosing to do something every day that requires faith. You overcome it by choosing every day to do something that requires faith. Jesus said this, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33. You might want to jot it down. It's not in your notes. Matthew chapter 6, verse 33. He said, seek first my kingdom and his righteousness. And then all of these other things you need are going to be given to you. Seek first my kingdom, my righteousness. I'll change your life. I want to be first. Can we be honest? For most of us, Jesus is much farther down the list. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 16th, 23rd, 47th. He says, I want to be first. I'll show you a video this morning. It's a song. It's a song by a woman that is an amazing, amazing Christian artist and writes incredible songs. The song is called First. It's by a woman named Laura Daigle. You might want to write that down because you can check it out on YouTube. Daigle is D-A-I-G-L-E. And I want you to listen to her sing, listen to the words. And while you're listening to the words, I want you to be asking yourself the question, am I ready to lock in as Jesus being first in my life? Am I ready to take the risk of saying, I'm going to do something that requires faith every day? And as you watch it, why don't you just quietly pray and say, God, that's where I'm at. That's where I want to be. Watch the screen. Ask you to do something. Can I ask you to make a commitment? Can I ask you to make a commitment to God and say, you know what, I want to seek you first. God, I'm willing to take a risk and do one thing each day that's going to require faith. Would you right now just go before God, and if that's the desire of your heart, if you're willing to do that, just tell him that right where you are right now. Go ahead and take a moment and tell him that. Without anybody looking around, would you be willing today to say, you know what, I just prayed that prayer, and as a sign to God, I want him to know. I'm just going to lift my hand up. Just lift your hand up. You just prayed that prayer. Just lift your hand up and say, you know what, that's where I'm at. That's what I want to do. Lift your hand up. Just say, yep, that's where I'm at. I want to do that. Yep, that's where I'm at. Well, Father, I thank you that you do amazing things in our hearts. I pray that you'd set our hearts on fire for you. That we would not just coast, that we wouldn't be indifferent, but we'd be willing to trust you to do one thing that requires faith every day, something bigger than us. Draw us close to you. I pray that we'd be enamored with you. Remind us that you are our God and that you want us to spend time with you, to trust you, to follow after you. Pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Stand together and let's sing.